Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the delegates who have taken the time out of your busy schedules. This is Nari Viswanathan, and I'm the Vice President and Principal Analyst for the Aberdeen Group. We have had a great attendance today, and really looking forward to this presentation. So the focus of this particular webinar is around high product value, short product shelf life, solving the biopharma supply chain conundrum through enhanced flexibility, visibility, and responsiveness. There are going to be 4 presenters for today's session. First, I would start off, and I'm the Vice President and Principal Analyst for the Aberdeen Supply Chain Practice, and I have conducted several research studies around supply chain visibility and responsiveness. So I will be presenting some of the findings from this particular report. In addition, we will have 3 other presenters, and I would like to read a brief bio so that you're familiar with their background. First of all, I would like to present to you Elizabeth Casas, who is the Director of Supply Chain Corporate Planning for Amgen. Elizabeth has worked at Amgen Sales and Marketing, Operations and Supply Chain Management for the past 15 years. She has experience with both the clinical and commercial supply chain functions of biopharmaceuticals. She recently led the global implementation of rapid response for production planning and inventory control across Amgen's regional and corporate supply chain divisions. And also joining us from Amgen is Chris Roth, who is the Director of Corporate Planning. Chris has worked at Amgen in master data management, ERP implementation projects, and supply chain management for the past 5 years. He now manages the corporate production planning team for mature commercial products. He holds a BS in Production and Operations Management from Cal Poly, SLO, as well as an MBA from Pepperdine University. Our last presenter of the day is Trevor Miles, who is the Director of Industry Applications Marketing at Kinaxis. Trevor is responsible for identifying market trends and translating these into high-level functional requirements for the company. And he also identifies opportunities for value capture by Kinaxis customers and prospects. Prior to joining Kinaxis, Trevor worked for i2 Technologies, in fact, where I also had worked at, and we were colleagues at that point in time. So one important point I wanted to mention is we are going to have polling questions throughout this presentation. So we'll be asking your feedback during the course of the presentation. Please feel free to answer your thoughts and give us your feedback. In addition to the these polling questions, we have 15 minutes at the end dedicated to question and answers. Please feel free to submit your questions through the webinar by using the text box at the bottom right of your screen and send them to myself, Nari. And at the end of the presentation, we'll definitely try our best to answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A time frame as possible. For now, I'm going to get started and talking about the framework for the discussion. And as the topic indicates, we're going to talk about the evolution of the biopharma supply chain. But before we do that, let's take a look at how the overall supply chains have evolved. So what we have seen from the Aberdeen research is that supply chains are no longer linear. They are not vertically integrated. We are seeing significant outsourcing at every aspect of the supply chain. And this has really resulted in the evolution of supply chains into what we call as an integrated demand-supply network. And there are 5 different elements of this network. The first is the demand network, which is where you are going to look at buyers of services and products, for example, retailers, distributors, value-added resellers, and so on. For the biopharma supply chain, the distributors of the pharmaceutical as well as the end retailers like the Walgreens and Kroger and those kind of retailers are really the customers. From an enterprise side, you're looking at different organizations such as sales, marketing, operations, manufacturing, and procurement. From the supply network side, you're looking at suppliers, contract manufacturers, original design manufacturers, 3PLs, and so on. And we are seeing the kind of the nascent trend where more and more biopharmaceutical manufacturers are looking at outsourcing their processes. Then you have the logistics network where you have third-party logistics providers, shippers, carriers, and so on. And then we have the financial network, where you have banks, supply chain finance providers, and so on. And what we see is there is lack of visibility at the edge of the enterprise across these different elements of the network, and trying to gain control of the processes is a key requirement that companies have. And these issues are highly prevalent in the biopharmaceutical supply chain because of the unique challenges that this industry has. In fact, the rest of the presenters, specifically those from Amgen, will be talking about these in more details. But in quick summary, these products are characterized by a very short life cycle in terms of the products which are under patent, but then they have a long product life, because once the patent expires, they can have generic drugs, and the profit margins dramatically reduce in that case. This industry is characterized by early stages of process outsourcing, and we have several players. We have the raw material suppliers of the bulk chemicals or specialty chemicals. We have the contract service partners who are involved in both the design outsourcing as well as manufacturing outsourcing. We have the life sciences companies. We have the brand owners. And then on the distribution side, we have various roles such as the pharmacies, the retail partners, and so on. So what we see is the need for being able to balance supply and demand is very critical. And in these industries, there is also a lot of focus on the supply network, because supply is quite expensive and scarce. And companies need to really focus on the working capital as well as the cost elements of the working capital. And these industries are also challenged with respect to the lack of visibility and collaboration at various levels within the supply chain. And as part of this presentation, we'll be understanding how to enable visibility and collaboration. So what we have seen from an Aberdeen research perspective, and in this point of time, we have a question, a polling question that you can see in your screen. Please feel free to answer that polling question. But from an Aberdeen research perspective, what we have really seen is, you can see a quote from one of the VP of supply chain at an organization, where they talk about, in the past, they could go away, or they could get away with not having to focus on supply chain visibility. But today, with much more of a distributed operation, and they are having to constantly reevaluate their multi-enterprise network and having to focus on visibility. And what we see is there are really 4 stages. The first stage is establishing business-to-business integration with their trading partners, and the second stage is ensuring that there is data transfer between the trading partners. But that will only get you to the stage where you can gain visibility of the processes. But if you really want to be responsive, wherein you want to make use of the data and take decisions, that's where the elements of collaboration and network intelligence comes into the picture. And an example of a collaborative process is sales and operations planning. In fact, we'll be talking a lot about sales and operations planning as part of this discussion. And the associated element of having the metrics available in real time and being able to take decisions is part of network intelligence, which will also be discussed in this presentation. So I wanted to talk about one key data point from recent Aberdeen research, where we asked companies about what was your top action to better manage complex demand-supply networks. And what we saw was these companies have identified that the need to improve supply chain visibility was the top action that they were focusing on. And the second most action was in terms of trying to improve the collaborative processes between business partners. And as I said before, the third point is in terms of trying to better integrate the financial planning and budgeting with the sales and operations planning process, which is what we call as integrated business planning. So with this, I would like to hand it over to Elizabeth to talk about some very specific discussions on Amgen, the kinds of challenges that they have faced, and the approaches that they have adopted to manage their multi-enterprise supply-demand network. So Elizabeth?
And continuous efforts to improve supply chain visibility. I will use the next minutes to highlight key facts about our company and some of the fundamental challenges of any biopharma supply chain. I think you presented some of them, Nari. and I will let Chris present the specific solutions we have implemented. So, Amgen was founded in 1980 and has been a pioneer in developing human therapeutics based on large molecule proteins delivered by injection. Over the years, we've expanded into small molecule oral therapies, but we actually concentrate on all modes of delivery. We really are after finding the best therapy to fight a specific disease process. And Nari, if you are online, I'm going to ask you to maybe move to the next slide. Thank you. So we've been founded in 1980, and we've started to develop and actually commercialize our product in the 90s. So if we go to the next slide, Amgen's R&D investment has been up to 20% of its global revenues in 2009. And Nari, I'm going to ask you to move the slide as well. Thank you. I think it's worth mentioning that our products have been used to treat over 18 million patients around the globe. And this slide really shows where Amgen has offices. Our products are distributed in these countries and many other markets. We have a significant presence in North America, in Europe, with research, manufacturing, distribution, and sales facilities really worldwide. Nari, thanks again for moving to the next slide. We do distribute 9 products under various strengths, presentation, and packaging configurations, yielding to thousands of SKUs. For example, Epogen was our first commercial product, was launched almost 20 years ago, and is used to treat anemia caused by kidney failure in patients on dialysis. And our last product, or latest product, I should say, Prolia, was launched this year in the US, Europe, Canada, and Australia, and is used to treat osteoporosis. It's also expected to be soon approved for the treatment of bone metastasis. So it's a highly anticipated launch. If you go to the next slide, one characteristic, and maybe the first one more slide, maybe, Nari, thank you. Yeah, when it comes to the characteristics of the biopharma supply chain, I think, Nari, you characterized them very well. The first, I think, challenge we face derives from the fact that we have to deal with rather complex biology used to produce proteins, and it drives significant supply variability compared to other industries. And it's a key component of supply planning. It's something that we factor in, master data, but it's certainly a constraint that we also look at and build safety stocks around. When it comes to manufacturing, manufacturing represents a major investment for those in the audience who are in the biopharma companies. I think you very well see what we are talking about, and the production lead times are rather long compared to many other industries, with end-to-end lead times that can be up to 12 months, depending on the production process. Regulatory is really the third key characteristic that shapes the biopharma supply chain. We need to comply with different standards. They are not the same in Europe, the US, as well as the other regions. We need to adhere to strict approved expiration dating, and we also have some major requirements when it comes to lot track trace, which actually requires us to build some key capabilities in ERP and advanced planning tools. And finally, I think it's important to highlight that the transition of manufacturing between manufacturing sites is expensive and rather time-consuming. It can take several years to start, validate, and get approval for commercial production. So I wanted to give a high-level look at the different constraints that do shape our supply chain, and some of those can be very different from other industries. So on the next slide, I wanted to give a very high level and simplified overview of our manufacturing process. I think it's important to highlight that we tend to keep safety stocks at these different manufacturing stages. We do produce what we call a bulk. We deal with bioreactors, the cells are grown, the proteins are purified. We then fill this active ingredient in either vials or syringes, and the product can be further processed into auto-injector devices. And then we have various packaging configurations to meet the specific country requirements all around the globe. On the next slide, I think we have here maybe a key component also of biopharma. The product structure is quite different from high-tech and from actually other industries. We usually start with, a few SKUs, what we call the bulk or active product ingredient, which is then differentiated between different strengths and filled, in different presentations. And we then multiply the number of SKUs because of the different regional regulations we have to comply with. And I think it's important to highlight that for these manufacturing stages, the bulk as well as the drug product, we have some specific expiration datings, 24 months for bulk and 24 months for drug product. So these rather short expiration datings combined with some high stop sale requirements in various countries up to 12 months, combined with some level of safety stock to certainly mitigate for demand and supply variability, do not provide us with very long selling windows. So it's certainly something that we need to factor in when we plan. And actually the use of an advanced planning tool like Rapid Response has helped us quite significantly in terms of managing that complexity. I think I already mentioned that the manufacturing cycle time is rather long, and again, this is a very simplified view. We have to manage up to 12 manufacturing stages from bulk to finished goods. So if we go to the next slide, what's really important for Amgen, actually it's been quite important over the past 2 years, but we are facing the need to enter a lot of new markets. We have multiplied the number of SKUs we deal with quite significantly. We have expanded our partnerships. We deal with many more logistics providers around the globe than we used to even 2 years ago. And it goes without saying we have an increased level of complexity that needs to be managed from plan to deliver. And we realized, again, a few years ago that this complexity required us to have a more integrated planning solution that would allow the corporate function, supply chain function, but also the sites, the regions, and to some extent our distributors to share a common view of the plan, to have the ability to generate scenarios, to really better understand how to plan for this increased level of complexity. And I must say that, after several iterations of advanced planning tools, we were able to implement Rapid Response last year, and I'm going to now ask Chris to provide you with the specifics of how we implemented the tool, and more importantly, what it gave us in terms of increased supply chain visibility. So Chris, I guess your slides will come next. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and hello, everybody. I'm going to build on what Elizabeth has said already and tell you about how Rapid Response has help us meet some of the challenges that we've had in our business. So if I dive right into it, essentially, Rapid Response has really helped us expedite our monthly planning cycle and adjustments to our production and distribution schedules. The enabling tools, some of the key enabling tools within Rapid Response are listed on the left-hand side of the slide here. So let me just take you through those. The first thing is that it provides us a logical scenario structure that's very understandable by the business and helps us keep coordinated and understand simulation versions versus our live version that we're doing planning against. Second, we are using heavily customized data alerts that allows us to audit both our master and transactional data, and also can send key reports as exceptions throughout the planning phases. So that's quite an enabler. The third thing is that we use hierarchies and filters quite a bit to allow us to effectively drill down and focus on the vital information as we're going through the planning process, which can oftentimes be a time sink and underappreciated. Lastly, there's various workbooks and scorecards that are provided as we're going through the planning process, and it helps us see our immediate impact and help summarize what our S&OP dilemmas may be as we're going through the process and even after the process. So those key tools there have enabled our planning process, which is depicted on the right-hand side. If I could say one word about our planning process is that we've really enabled collaboration. And so where we start with our process is really the marketing forecast. We receive a marketing forecast, and we assemble that today. There are thoughts about how to expand on that further, given what we've been able to achieve with the tool so far. But we take it from the market forecast and look at, by region, the demand plan and the distribution across our distribution sites. From there, we're planning at our site production schedule in the short term, and for us it's about 3 to 4 months. And we really are able to integrate with our site counterparts along with our corporate team, which Elizabeth and I represent. And essentially, from there, we use that as a starting point to put together our longer-term plan, which goes out through up to 3 to 4 years. And once we're completed with one of those cycles, we actually summarize that information and can use that in our S&OP process, ultimately resulting in input to our next marketing forecast and next cycle. So really what we've seen is a speed through that process on the right, enabled by rapid response. So move on to the next slide. Another key capability that rapid response has brought us is integration with our SAP execution system. We are currently automatically synchronized using the closed-loop technology of rapid response by pulling daily transfers of master and transactional data from SAP into rapid response, which really gives us our starting picture of inventory and firm receipts. This is incredibly important as we're trying to align with the demand changes and any supply variability that we may be seeing month to month. From there, we actually use our master data and generate orders using the fast MRP engine of rapid response throughout our network and product structure. So I think you'd seen a depiction of that Elizabeth had shown earlier. So that BOM structure really goes from a packaged product all the way down to our drug substance, and it considers key settings in terms of safety stock and lead time offset, et cetera. And that's planning through our 7 planned manufacturing stages. And once we're done with that plan and we've collaborated and evaluated the final results, one of the scenarios we use in rapid response is actually pushed back using the closed-loop technology into SAP for execution in the form of planned orders, purchase requisitions. And basically, that's what keeps us in sync and is built upon when we create actual shop floor orders and distribution movements throughout the supply chain. So you can see how that loop is highly tied to the planning cycle loop that we showed in the previous slide. If we go into the next slide, this is depicting our funnel of scenarios, and I think I could probably speak for many people in the audience that there are many scenarios that senior management can come up with, and even through the levels of management. So what we've been able to enable here is maybe not every question can be answered, but we've certainly broadened our bandwidth of what we can answer in a much quicker time frame. So in the top of our funnel here, we're showing some of the key elements that we're able to pull as levers as we go through the scenario process. So we look at different demand sensitivities. We look at different supply assumptions, whether we have longer distribution times or if we have longer disposition times, safety stock, et cetera. We also look at our work center information to understand rough cut capacity for number of hours and number of units. And lastly, I think a very key element of what rapid response has brought to us is time-phased parameters, some things that aren't necessarily enabled by your native SAP system. And in there, we can look at time-phase goods receipt time, time-phase expiration, time-phase safety stock, and really set different points over a period of time to monitor or manage and align with our product life cycles. So the enabling capability of rapid response is enabling us to be able to perform risk-based supply planning, inventory management scenarios, impact on capacity utilization, and finally waste management, which is what I'll talk about a little bit more in detail. This next slide is depicting how we are actually using some logic inside of rapid response that is really a key feature provided that we need in our industry, and that's around expiration planning logic. And we're using this to help reduce our waste and to ensure supply. And for us, it's our motto is in the middle of this slide. It's every patient, every time. So we're, as we said earlier in the slides, we're a high service level organization. So where we start is, earlier Elizabeth had shown our manufacturing process, and I've represented it with a syringe. Now that might be a vial or some other device. But upon filling our active drug substance inside of one of these syringes, there's a clock that starts, and that clock is measuring our approved expiry timeline. Across each of our products, we have different expiry timelines, but I'm representing just a generic one for one of our products. So from that point A on the slide, we need to then package the product out into different presentations to meet country-specific inserts and number of packs needed by our end users, our end patients. And ultimately, that has to happen and leave Amgen's control before we hit what we're calling a minimum shelf life. And when we consider that element our stop sell date, so you can see the little stop sign in there. And that's to really give time for the wholesalers, pharmacies, and actual patient usage so that they can use the product before expiration. Now, in an ideal world, we would go through these cycles way ahead of time and wouldn't be, right up against the clock. But there are times, due to our high service levels, long cumulative lead times, that we can get closer to our stop sell dating. And that's something that our groups manage very actively and have needed tools, which rapid response has been an enabler. In particular, the planning requirements that we're looking for is first to identify our expiration risk to help us drive corrective actions well in advance of when the event may actually occur. Second, if there's nothing that we can do to correct them, we'd like the planning tool to decrement any projected expiring orders and replan to reach our safety stock so that we can see that we've loaded our capacity appropriately in the future. So this is a summary of the logic itself, and on our next slide it gives a detailed view of the planning sheet inside of rapid response. So if you are a rapid response user, this should look fairly familiar to you. And I wanted to point out a couple of key elements that Amgen users are seeing that may be an enabling technology that you would consider. First of all, you can see on the left-hand side, we've added a row in here called expiry risk. And what that expiry risk is it meets our need to actually identify an alert and drive our mitigating actions. So it's telling us in our current bucket depicted by this timeline that we have 13,000 units that we're going to be hitting expiration sometime in the future. So if there's some mitigation that we can take now, we could actually avoid that expiration either by reducing the production or finding another demand that it might be able to be allocated to. As we look out in time, in this case, we're assuming that we couldn't mitigate it. You can see that the planning logic then shows an expired quantity for that same 13,000 that goes unused, and actually decrements it from our on-hand balance. That allows that in future buckets, when we have new demand, that'll allow a new order to be kicked off and planned accordingly and load our capacity. So this is a very key element to our planning process. We are using it mostly in simulation mode right now, and we plan on implementing it across our process over the upcoming months. So in summary, I just wanted to summarize the different elements of how not only expiring planning, but other functionalities within rapid response have helped us grow as a company to meet our complexity and scalability needs. On the left-hand side, rapid response has really been an enabler to help us align our network planning with our sites and our distribution replenishment. The collaboration effect there between the site and the corporate function is very, very important and is a key enabler of what rapid response can do, just with alerts and messaging and generally using a single source of data. Secondly, the expiry planning logic that's actually part of the planning analytics is something that we are using and plan to use going forward to help us manage those tight spots that we get into on occasion per product. Third bullet point here is around scenario analysis and the ever-growing ideas of different scenarios that we can do. We're trying to find every day new ways to meet it using the tool, and we've been really successful, I think, at delivering those analysis with our tool set to help optimize our network. S&OP reporting, I can't say enough about how flexible and how many reports we've been able to make in a very short development cycle, I might add, to meet our needs and to integrate with the functions outside the planning organization. And then lastly, the integration of inventory valuation scenarios with our finance group. So we're really starting to see that our finance group is starting to join in and using the tool set because they can use the features and functionality of rapid response to help value inventory and help us project as we do our scenario analysis. So in terms of business impact, it's really provided us higher quality of planning outputs, scalability of planning and business complexity, waste reduction or ability to actively manage expiration, improve our cycle time for our planning, our monthly planning cycle, as well as simulation deliverables. And lastly, it helps to consolidate and synchronize our network view. We're really hoping that there's even more that we can add to this list over time, and we're very happy with what we've been able to achieve so far. So with that, I will turn it over to Trevor.
Hi all. Just thank you everyone for participating. Nari has had his turn to say that. I would like to include my thanks. So it's left for me to try and wrap this up to bring in the different themes from the different speakers, and really I want to bring those themes in to focus on the value potential to biopharma of a greater supply chain efficiency. What does that mean? Ultimately you need to go to your bosses or the CFO somewhere to justify any projects that you might want to go through. And I just want to bring out some data that would illustrate some aspects where we really do believe and we have evidence that benefits can really be achieved, hard, tangible benefits. So if we start from the perspective, and many of the analysts such as Aberdeen and AMR and Altimeter and a number of others have indicated that the high-tech supply chains are recognized to be best in class for a number of functional and market reasons, and I'll go through some of those. But just starting from the perspective of, if we're going to look at what could be done in biopharma, what could be done in pharma, are there some lessons to be learned from some other industries? And why not go to the one that's recognized throughout the world as being the area, the market where they have the best-in-class supply chains. But we must pay attention to the functional difference and organizational differences, many of which Elizabeth has brought out. And Chris mentioned the aspect right at the top about customer service. They have a mantra of every patient, every time. So customer service has to be 100%. Some of their drugs are at least very lifestyle alleviating and improving. In some cases, they are related to life and death decisions. And therefore, anything less than 100% customer service is something very difficult for them to accept. If we look on the high-tech side, Well, there is some consequence to the company if somebody does not have that particular company's product to buy. They might buy somebody else's, but roughly there's an equivalent product that they can get to very easily. And for in high tech, they have to make a strong trade-off between customer service and inventory. Elizabeth also showed very clearly the reverse of V-shaped bomb, where they start from very few ingredients and end up with a massive amount of SKU because of packaging requirements, because of different presentations, different strengths of the different drugs. So lots of different shapes in the bomb, versus if you look at the assembly operation within high tech, it's a regular A-shaped bomb where you take in lots of items and you put in them together to manufacture finished goods with a lot less variation than there is typically within the V-shaped bomb within pharmaceuticals. Nari has referred to the fact that in pharmaceuticals, by comparison, there's some nascent outsourcing, so people are beginning to do that. There are a number of companies out there that are focused entirely on outsourcing. We've come across some companies that have actually outsourced their manufacturing entirely, but compared to high tech, it's still at very early stages. Yet if we look at the visibility requirements that Nari was referring to, these are beginning to show evidence of those requirements within the biopharmaceutical industry that are very prevalent within the high tech industry. Then highly regulated, I cannot stress to the audience that is not in biopharma how much churn, how much uncertainty this creates within the biopharma supply chain. If there's some government body that's deciding whether or not and when you can sell your product into a certain region, and if you want to make an engineering change, you have to go back to that regulatory body and ask for permission to sell that formulated product into that region. That adds a lot of uncertainty into your market penetration. If you think about planning your inventories, and remember Chris was taking you through all of the product expiry, and if you've got 12-month lead time, you probably want to start your bulk production long time before you can actually sell that product into a particular region. But that's a lot of expiry risk that you're taking on, and you need to be able to do what-if analysis to really understand what that expiry is. But something I must point out that is maybe not as relevant to I know it's not as relevant to the biopharma industry, but high-tech sees a lot of price expiry. So in many cases, the components are going down in price, which is a good thing, but once they've been put into a finished good, that finished good is going down in price very, very rapidly compared to biopharmaceuticals. So there's a time by which if they manufacture the item too early, the product price is going to be below what the manufactured price, so they'll be making a loss on that. And there's such a rapid cycle of products within high-tech that they've got to control the finished goods and, in fact, even the components very, very strictly so that they don't face a lot of expiry risk, price expiry risk, and excess and obsolete within high-tech electronics. The fundamental difference is if we look at really how these two organizations behave differently and why they behave differently. In the pharmaceutical industry, it's not unusual to have a 75% gross margin, whereas in high tech, a 15% gross margin is a pretty good one. So if we just think about what that means for these organizations, if a biopharmaceutical company loses a sale, they have lost 75%. If they have to throw something away because it's expired, they have to throw away 25%. If we compare that to high tech, if they lose a sale, they've lost 85%. If they have to throw something, if they lose a sale, they've lost 15%. If they have to throw away something, they have to throw away 85%. So they're going to be a lot more focused on the efficiency of the upstream supply chain and making sure they've got the right inventory at the right place, and not too much inventory, because if they've manufactured a finished good and they cannot sell it, they've got to throw away 85%. They cannot recover those costs. A big, big difference. So if we look at really what that means in terms of the financial consequences to that, I took some of the 10 largest biopharmaceutical companies, analyzed the last years of their publicly stated financial reports, and we see that the average days of inventory is 200 days. Whereas if we look at the average days of inventory on hand in high tech, it's only 30 days. So a radical difference, 1/10 of the number of days. And Elizabeth has discussed some of that. With 18 months of cycle time, that's a lot of inventory that you carry in WIP. If we look at cash to cash, 220 days over the last 3 days within pharmaceuticals, but only 30 days within high tech. And the net result is if we look at working capital ratios, and working capital in this particular case is defined as the current assets minus the current liabilities over revenue, then we see that the working capital ratio within pharmaceuticals has been 33% or 0.33, whereas in high tech it's only 0.12. Now let's think about what that means to a company. If we take a $10 billion company, which is reasonable within the biopharmaceutical industry, that difference of 0.21 in the working capital ratio means that that company, if they could get their working capital down to 0.12 as within the high-tech industry, could save $2 billion in working capital. Now, there's some fundamental reasons, differences, and Elizabeth alluded to one of those. The asset costs are much higher in pharmaceuticals than they are in high-tech electronics. That's not the case for semiconductor, but if we look at consumer electronics and more the high-tech aspects of computers and peripherals and all of those, then their asset requirements are a lot lower. But nevertheless, there's a lot more inventory, as we see from the days of inventory, and there's a lot that can be done on that. In fact, we can look at some external studies that have been done on this. One that has been conducted recently by A.T. Kearney, where they've looked at a number of companies, and I would encourage you to go and find their report on pharmapro.com, where they give some more details of the, not of the companies they studied, but more details on how they analyzed this information. But if we look just at inventory, by being within the first quartile within the pharmaceutical industry. So this is not a comparison against other industries, but just if all of the companies within the pharmaceutical industries had an inventory or days of inventory that was within the first quartile within the pharmaceutical industry, the pharmaceutical industry would be saving $16.6 billion, which is a lot of money to be taken out of the supply chain. Now, in all truth, we need to balance that against the statement that is very relevant to Amgen of every patient, every time. So you need to go through an analysis of understanding what impact is that going to have on your customer service level and how much risk are you willing to take on that side. But nevertheless, there are some companies that are operating at the level that clearly they are satisfied with their customer service level, and if everybody operated with that level of inventory, the industry as a whole would be saving $16.6 billion, which is a lot of money out there, especially in these economic times. So the question very quickly is how to get there. So how can companies bring this all together? And Chris has mentioned a lot of this within the discussions. Nari has brought this out, Elizabeth, everybody else like that, okay, within the discussions. But I just thought I would bring a nice little graphic to try and indicate how all of this comes together. So Chris most certainly brought out the questions of bringing finance and operational alignment. So being able to give reports into finance. And we've seen in some other industries and how, in fact, people are interested in bringing very much more of a financial focus into the whole sales and operations planning process. So now you can get forward projections of, for example, cash to cash, a working capital within your sales and operations planning process. And in fact, One company, I was at a conference just last week talking about S&OP. They're talking about using the longer-term sales forecast as part of their budgeting process, so that you don't get finance pushing their budget and their financial forecast in terms of revenue, but really doing it bottom-up, bringing in the sales organization. I think there's lots of sense in that because of the aspect on the right-hand side where we're talking about organizational alignment. Bringing all of these organizations together. Nari has referred to the term of integrated business planning, which is perhaps the extension of S&OP to bring in a lot more financial focus. But bringing all of these organizations together, Chris has talked a lot about the constraint navigation of being able to understand what your capacities are available, what lot sizes you need to run, where your inventories are available, what expiry risk you've been exposed to. All of those things of being able to navigate around those constraints is a key aspect. All in the approach to try and get very effective demand-supply balancing. I was very pleased to hear Chris bring out the term scenario analysis and indicate how much they are using those scenarios. So much of the supply chain, especially as you start looking out into the longer term, is uncertain. Is our demand really going to be that value? Are we really going to be able to get approval from our different regions for sale? Are we really going to be able to get that capacity up at that time? Is our product portfolio going to perform as we had planned? All of those things are uncertainties where you really need to be able to get a risk-adjusted plan, and not just a one-number plan. What the scenarios give you is this ability to say worst case, best case, and how do we operate in between those two best case, worst case scenarios? What do we do to mitigate the worst case scenarios and take maximum advantage of the best case scenarios? Those are the types of things that you can really do very, very effectively with a scenario planning type of capability. But with that, I will hope that I have drawn some attention to the fact that there's lots of potential benefit out there for people who can operate their supply chains more efficiently and effectively within the biopharmaceutical space, maybe taking some lessons from other industries in understanding how this can be achieved. But I want to thank the other speakers as well, and now we can open it up to questions.
Thanks, Trevor. Yep, I'm here. And thanks to everybody for the discussion. We've had quite a few questions, and I'd like to get started. There are questions which span more on the strategic time frame as well as on the execution time frame. So we can maybe start off from some of the strategic discussion. The question is, how is this process and the associated technology with rapid response helping Amgen as the network and the market footprints grow? For example, when the market footprint grows into new geographies, how does the solution help Amgen?
Elizabeth, would you like to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I think what the system, the advanced planning tool has allowed us to consolidate all demands and react very quickly in terms of do we have existing inventory, which type of adjustments we need to make. I think it goes back to scenario planning. For a lot of those emerging markets, we have a high level of variability in terms of demand, in terms of approval timeline, in terms of lead times. And we are constantly adjusting the quantities to be delivered. We try to optimize as much as possible expiration dating. So again, I think it goes back to the ability to run scenarios rather quickly and integrate outcomes of specific supply plans for an emerging market into the bigger picture, into the network plan.
Elizabeth, a quick additional question which comes to my mind. When you do that, do you include sustainability, carbon footprint, those kind of considerations? Or it's not in the scope as of now?
It's something we've been talking about internally, but it's not in the scope of what we are currently, the way we are currently using the tool. I mean, you could make the argument that reducing scrap, especially when it comes to, you know, materials like syringes and vials, has some impact. But I mean, this would be stretching it. It's not something we have actively monitored.
Let me add a little bit. Let me add a little bit to that one. We have used the tool just from its general reporting standpoint to understand the volumes and pass those volumes along to our groups that are looking at total carbon footprint. Certainly, just the manufacturing piece isn't the whole picture, but we're an element of an overall picture.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The additional question that we have got is, how is the Amgen supply planning and procurement system integrated with its distributors and suppliers? Do you see any potential application for the particular tool that you have in extending it to that?
Yes, this is Elizabeth again. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Chris.
No, go ahead, Elizabeth. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that it's certainly something we've been asked for, and we are actively seeking, you know, best practices. We know that high-tech has already implemented, you know, a much broader network than what we started with, and we are looking forward to getting, you know, some experience from other users of rapid response. But it's certainly something we are looking for to implement over the next, I would say, 2 years.
Okay, that's great. And the next question that we have from one of the participants is, so we've talked briefly about financial planning. You know, can you specifically talk about what kind of reports is the financial organization using through your financial, through your interface with the financial planning process, and you know, talk a little bit about that.
Sure, I can take that one, and please add to it, Elizabeth, as we go through. One of the key capabilities that we've integrated is putting actual costs in. As we'd seen earlier, some of our lots can take multiple months, even years before they're consumed, and so providing that capability to understand the actual cost rather than using standard costs can sometimes significantly change the picture as we summarize. In addition, we've been putting together long-term, mid to long-term summaries that get captured both in units and active grams and eventually in cost that get used by our finance counterparts. I'd say in addition to that, there are scenarios that we would be wanting to cost, not all of them, and therefore we would use those as well as the revenue aspects that we could integrate. Elizabeth, would you add anything to that?
No, those are the key points. Thanks, Chris.
A question which comes to my mind also is, you know, is this information used in, for example, the quarterly reporting to shareholders, you know, things of that nature, external facing financial documents, or is it more consumed for internal purposes?
I'd say we're the first link in that process. So we do provide initial data, but there's a roll-up and sometimes forecasting of products that aren't necessarily imaged as inside of our SAP system yet, because we're looking out over a longer period of time. But it's definitely a good chunk of that process, yes. Okay. And then talking about the SAP system, there's a question which one of the folks have asked is, you know, what's one of the reason why you adopted the rapid response solution on top of the ERP system? So what kind of functionalities was lacking in SAP that drove you to look elsewhere? Well, I'd say in particular with the SAP supply planning aspect, it was the speed of replanning was certainly one aspect of it, and the lack of reporting or integrated reporting and the lack of good collaboration tools. I think those are some key ones. Elizabeth, would you add more to that?
No, I think those are the key ones, and you mentioned in your presentation that the ability to manage time-phased assumptions was also key for a lot of our products.
Yeah, mainly the expiration planning kind of aspects, right?
Right, as well as process assumptions, good receipt times. Yeah, several assumptions. It's not a capability that we had in the advanced planning tool associated with SAP.
Sure. We have one additional question which talks about the approval process. So once you have the S&OP plan developed in this kind of a solution, is there an approval process that happens before the data gets sent back to SAP?
Yes, there is, and actually it's one benefit of the tool because reporting is integrated. We have the ability to generate consolidated reports around production, supply, or a few other key metrics, and we have a chance to review the proposed production plans with the different manufacturing sites before pushing the plan back into SAP for execution. So we have formal reviews between corporate and site. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say one additional piece is when we look at scorecards, it's our ability to look at what did we plan last time versus what are we planning this time, and that's a key metric that's shared as Elizabeth is describing.
Sure. That's helpful in clarifying the workflow that happens between a planning system and an execution system. I think that handoff where companies often struggle with is and feel challenged with. So that's great to know that you have a formal process for that. So one final question is around the deployment model. One of the users have asked whether are you using an on-premise or an on-demand type of deployment model? And do you, if by chance you are doing on-demand, what are some of the benefits and shortfalls of this approach?
Yeah, we are using an.
Go ahead.
I guess we can mention very briefly that we are using an on-demand approach, and I think that the main reason is that Amgen didn't necessarily want to invest significantly in an internal IS support platform with the servers, the appropriate IS staff, because really we have a relatively small number of end users. I mean, it's growing quite quickly, but the IS resources are mainly outsourced and focused on ERP maintenance and upgrades, and the internal support for rapid response, could have been diluted. And we've been very pleased with the on-demand approach. I mean, from a disadvantage standpoint, I think we've assessed that it's not necessarily cheaper, but overall, it's meeting our needs.
Yes. I think that's helpful, and I think it makes a point that given the process is so collaborative, an on-demand kind of approach we have seen from Aberdeen Research is more advantageous in this kind of a business-to-business kind of environment. With this, I think we have run short of time. Most of the questions have been answered. If you have any questions which you have not answered, we'll definitely circle back and make sure that we get those resolved. So with this, I wanted to thank all the participants for a great discussion, and thanks to all the folks who have been listening and sending your questions as well.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone from Trevor too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.